And I am so pleased that you are here with us, as I said, with our Catholic Schools Committee. And while Maggie is getting our slides up, I want to let you know that the pieces that this group is going to focus on include Title II funds, IDEA money, insurance, school choice, and nonprofits. So we will get started.
Thank you, Beth. I will be talking about Title II funding and its application to Catholic schools, especially in the context of equitable services under federal law. So what is Title II funding, right? Sometimes we ask and wonder. So Title II Part A of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, as amendment by the Every Student Success Act, is designed to support effective instruction by providing federal funding for professional development, recruitment, and retention of educators. The primary goal of Title II Part A is to increase student achievement by improving the quality and effectiveness of teachers, principals, and other school leaders. Also, to increase the number of teachers, principals, and other school leaders who are effective in improving student academic achievement in schools, and to provide low-income and minority students greater access to effective teachers, principal, and other school leaders. This funding is available to both public and private schools throughout equitable services. So how can Catholic schools access Title II funding? The Every Student Success Act introduced several important changes that significantly impact how Catholic schools access and utilize Title II funding. One of the most notable changes is the requirement that proportional share or federal funds for private schools be calculated based on the total LEA allocation before any set aside to ensure fairness. ESSA mandates appointing a state ombudsman to monitor and enforce equitable services for private schools, educators, and students. Catholic schools, though, must annually notify their LEA of the intent to participate. LEAs must engage in a timely and meaningful consultation with the private school officials, and also funds are not given directly to Catholic schools. Instead, services are provided by or through the LEA. Here in this slide, you can see some of the allowable restrictions for that what Title II can be used for. And just to remember, right, like the ESSA, especially Section 8501, LEAs must ensure that services provided to private schools educators are equitable to those provided to public school educators. So Title II, Part A, provides multiple ways to meet these objectives, like an SEA and an LEA may use Title II Part funds, for example, to strengthen teacher and principal certification or licensure, induct or mentor new educators, recruit or retain effective in field and experienced teachers, like provide high quality professional development and coaching, increase like time for collaboration, and support multiple career paths for teachers and school leaders advancements. So this can include kind of like equal access to PD opportunities, like I mentioned before. And also it's important to remember that professional development must also be sustained rather than consistent of one standalone, one day or short-term workshops, and it must be intensive, collaborative, job-embedded, data-driven, and classroom focused. I'm not saying like, oh, you might have one of them, but that one has to have purpose on your annual goal. So that's what I mean by that. An equitable share of funding based on total student enrollment, not just low-income students like in Title I. So service also too, like I said, must begin at the same time as those in public schools. So what are practical steps, right, that for Catholic school leaders? So remember, always initiate consultation with the LEI. Contact them early in the school year. Request a meeting to discuss like Title II participation. Like confirm your school's intent to participate in the federal programs via the appropriate application system. and ensure the LEA provides a timely and meaningful consultation. There are certain documents that are needed. So conduct, like, for example, a needs assessment for professional development and technology. Like, gather data on student achievement, demographics, and teacher qualifications. Identify specific goals for teacher and leader development, and list desired professional development topics and deliver formats, for example, workshops, online courses, and ensure all requested services are secure, neutral, and non-ideological. Like, avoid using Title II funds for religious instruction or worship. Verify that funds are not used to supplement existing programs, and confirm that all services are provided by or through the LEA. And maintain records of all services received and participants involved. Evaluate the effectiveness of the professional development activities. Meet annually with your LEA to review progress and to plan for the next year. Here's a list of resources. All of those should be clickable. So once you receive, once we finish a webinar, I'm sure you're going to be receiving the slides. You can click to all of this, and then you'll be able to find more information about Title II funding and professional development, frequently questions that that get asked in terms of the Title II, and all the allowable and restrictions from Title II funds.
I'm Diane.
I'm going to pass it to Diane.
Thank you. I'm Diane Elliott with the Diocese of Arlington in Virginia, and I'm going to address the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is the special education law that was signed into law. It was enacted by Congress in 1975. There have been a number of revisions over the years. The last one being 21 years ago, December 2004. And it was enacted to ensure free and appropriate education for students with disabilities. As I said, it's a public school law, but students who are in our Catholic schools have the opportunity to be evaluated, identified, and receive services from the public school system if they are deemed eligible as a child with a disability by the public school system. And there is a yearly consultation, and this is different consultation from what Patty just spoke of because it's a separate law. But this consultation takes place between the Catholic school representatives and usually other private schools in the local jurisdiction and the public school representatives. And it's to talk about the number of students who have been identified as having a disability, what their needs are, and then what services would be most beneficial to those students. Public school makes the final decision about which services will be provided. Now, I know this whole webinar is about funding. You need to know there are no dollars or no money that comes to the Catholic school from the public school. The students are getting services, and the public schools are spending a proportionate share of their federal dollars on students in private schools. So if your Catholic schools are not participating currently, or you don't have students who are receiving special ed services, but they may be eligible, you should be in contact with the public school district where that school is located and start talking about what services your students would benefit from. And again, they have to have been identified as eligible from the public school system. One of the things that many people look for from this whole IDEA law is the psychoeducational evaluation. And that is how public school identifies that students are eligible for special ed. In other words, is there a disability that requires the student to receive special education services so they can access the curriculum? There are benefits to having the child identified through the public school system. It's free to the parents. They've been paying taxes, so this is covered under those taxes. It's multidisciplinary, so you have multiple people looking at the child in order to make the determination whether or not there is a disability. It takes 65 days to go through the whole process. Some people view that as a drawback. They want testing tomorrow and the answer the next day. It does take some time. And you need to keep in mind that public school is looking to answer two questions. Does the child have a disability that impacts education? And does the child need special education services in order to access the curriculum? There are a number of people who don't want anything to do with the public school system, and they think, okay, I'm just going to go have my child evaluated by a local psychologist. Or so under that process, it costs money. It's going to be several $1,000s that the parents are putting forth if they are able to do so. There are times when medical insurance will help to defray some of that cost, but you have to be able to make a connection to a medical need. An educational need is typically not covered under most medical insurances. When you go the private evaluation route, you have one person evaluating that child, and they're answering one question: does the child have a disability? So having a child evaluated by a private evaluator does not necessarily mean that they would be eligible if you took that evaluation to public school. And so I always encourage our families, take that evaluation to the public school district and see if there's any other piece of evaluation that they need to do in order to make that determination. Because the amount of federal dollars that a public school has to spend on students in private schools is based on the number of students that public school knows about. And if we are all identified under a private evaluation, public school doesn't know these children with disabilities exist. And so it's very difficult in order to make sure we get the amount of service that our children are entitled to.
Thank you. This is Maggie Hubbard, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about insurance covering for services. Of course, as Diane just outlined, that you have the option through IDEA to receive services through the public schools, but you also have the option to seek services for your child outside of the school in the private sector. Now, because those private services can be very expensive, you should always see if insurance can at least partially cover the costs. If you do seek insurance coverage, there are things you should do and should know. For instance, you need to first know your insurance. You have to start by familiarizing yourself with the details of your health insurance plan. And if you have questions about your coverage, you need to ask specifically. You need to ask your company for clarification on those. Now, if you're seeking services for your child on the autism spectrum, you need to review the state-specific autism mandate. There's a federal mandate that requires insurance companies in all 50 states to provide coverage for services for individuals with an autism diagnosis. And in fact, every state has adopted some form of the mandate. These laws require some level of coverage for evidence-based autism treatments, such as applied behavioral analysis, but it varies in specifics like age limits and annual spending caps. Additionally, Medicaid, which is not state-funded, it's federally funded, Medicaid programs are required to offer medically necessary diagnostic and treatment services for children with autism spectrum disorders. So what do you do, though, if the services your plan covers don't fit your child's specific needs? One option is to advocate for the coverage. Make sure, though, that when you do ask, you have the documentation supporting your child's need and why the services that have been requested are the best therapeutic options for your child. If coverage for services is initially denied by your insurance provider, remember that you always have the right to appeal these types of decisions. Again, gather supporting documentation and seek support from therapists and other medical professionals to request that the insurance provider reconsider coverage for those services. Now, whether you are seeking coverage for ABA, speech and language, occupational therapy, or physical therapy, you need to be proactive and find out about your coverage in advance so that you aren't caught with unexpected bills. When contacting the member services department of your insurance provider, it's a good idea to be prepared with a list of questions to make sure you have all the necessary details. And you'll see a list of possible questions on this slide. For instance, does your insurance plan even cover the services you're seeking for your child? You may want to ask the therapy provider for the specific codes they use when billing to help in your conversation with the insurance company. One caveat I need to add here is that there are service providers who don't accept insurance. They might submit the claim to the company for you, but they expect you to pay at the time of the services provided, and then you will be reimbursed by the company. This is something else you'll need to have established in advance of starting service. Now, Diane touched on this when she was talking to you about the difference between getting your evaluations done through the school system and privately. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the insurance implications of that. So in addition to using insurance to cover the services, you may want to investigate whether your insurance will cover the cost of evaluations. Increasingly, though, insurance companies are cutting back on what they will pay for private evaluations, and many companies aren't paying anything at all. They might say they cover neuropsychological evaluations, but in reality, the plan only covers medical issues such as brain tumors, traumatic brain injuries, and multiple sclerosis. If you do choose to see if insurance will cover the cost of an evaluation, it often helps if the referring doctor can frame the issue in the context of a medical diagnosis, as Diane mentioned. For example, rather than saying that your child is having school problems, the doctor could say that your child is presenting with variable attention, trouble with memory, and difficulty with impulse control. And so the request for a neuropsychological testing is to rule out a medical cause for those concerns. The referring clinician should highlight any relevant medical issues in the referral, such as head injury, premature birth, epilepsy, congenital abnormalities, head trauma, or other relevant medical diagnoses. And also having a medical doctor make a referral for a neuropsychological assessment can help with the insurance company's willingness to pay for these services. Likewise, if you're concerned about your child's emotional well-being, the referring clinician could use formal psychiatric diagnosis as rule-outs when making the referral for psychological testing. Now, even when taking all of these steps to improve the chances that the evaluation cost will be covered by your insurance company, there is, of course, no guarantee. As I mentioned before, you always have the right to appeal an authorization denial from your insurance company. And also, as I mentioned before, there's a chance your insurance company may cover at least some of the cost, but the practice you are using or the provider you're using won't accept your insurance. In that case, make sure that you get a receipt from the evaluator with all the appropriate diagnostic codes, service codes, and tax identification number so you can submit it to your insurance company for reimbursement. One last point to make and to really emphasize is that neuropsychological testing often consists of both educational and neuropsychological testing. Even if your insurance company covers the cost of the neuropsychological testing, educational testing is rarely covered.
All right, we're going to dig into some school choice programs now. And what I'd like to do is give you an overview of what these programs are. It's important to know that state by state, there are a lot of variances and differences among the programs, but I'll give you kind of the common threads among the programs and then where you can go to get more information and which states have these programs. So let's dig in. We're going to talk about vouchers, ESAs, that's educational savings accounts, tax credit scholarships, and special needs scholarship programs. So first, just take a look at this list. There are 33 states that participate in choice programs, funded choice programs for families. That first list there is for states that provide vouchers. That second list, educational savings accounts. That third list, tax credit scholarships. And then there are, I think that's 12 or 13 states there that have specifically special needs programs that are attached to either tax credits or ESAs. So I'll try to talk about that and untangle. I know that we could really get into the weeds with some of these things, but hopefully I'll be able to at least give you something to go on for the state that you live in. That, and I want to go back to something that Diane and Maggie both said. I'm going to kind of reiterate for those special needs programs when we get to those, that documentation for those is very important. And so we're going to kind of revisit that idea of making sure that you do have the proper documentation to be able to apply for those scholarships. And so we'll talk about that as well. So let's start with vouchers. With vouchers, if you have a state tuition voucher, the money follows the child essentially. So the state decides there's going to be a voucher for a specific amount of money that a family can use to go to the private school of their choice. There is an application process for that, and the qualification varies by state. But there are few instances where a student would not qualify for a voucher. It's a pretty open system. The money is directed from the public school to the private school of the parent's choice. So the money doesn't go to the parents. The money goes to the private school that the family is applying to attend. And the only thing about that is that schools do have to opt in to want to be a voucher school. So you might decide, oh, I'd like to use my voucher to go to this private school, but maybe that private school has not opted into being a voucher school. So that's something that you have to figure out first. Does the school that you're sending your children to accept vouchers? Then you can fill out that application and go through that process. And those vouchers, they might cover full tuition or they might cover partial tuition. For elementary schools, often they do cover full tuition. For high schools, they often cover partial tuition. So why does this matter to parents of kids with disabilities or exceptional needs? If you are able to get your entire tuition covered or a good chunk of your tuition covered, then you are able to, be able to perhaps use funds that you might have been using to pay tuition to get some outside services if that's what your child needs, or to pay for an ABA, or to pay for speech therapy or occupational therapy. That if all of your money was tied up in tuition, you might not have had that extra, maybe your insurance isn't covering it. There could be all of these variables, but it's to free up, if there are vouchers or ESAs or any school choice scholarships, use those so that you can use the funding or the money that you're not paying in tuition to be able to use for other services if they are not covered by insurance or something else. That's why it matters. Okay, let's talk a little bit about ESAs. In the case of ESAs, the money is directed to the parent. Again, there is an application process to go through, and I can speak from here in the state of Arizona. Every school is an ESA school, so it's not like it isn't an opt-in here, like vouchers are an opt-in. So look into if your state has ESAs, find that information on your state Department of Education website, and find out where is that application and what are the qualifications, because again, those vary by state. So an educational savings account can be used for tuition, for school supplies, for online courses, for therapies, for tutoring, and for textbooks. So there's a little bit, you can see there's a little bit broader range of what an ESA can be used for. The amount of an ESA, much like vouchers, it varies by state. So again, you have to look on your state Department of Education website and find out what those amounts are for elementary and for high school, because they are typically different. And the amount might vary if a student has a diagnosed disability that has educational impact and requires additional services. So especially in those states, there were 12 or 13 states that I had listed where there are additional special needs scholarship programs. This is where that comes in. If a student has a documented diagnosed disability, there may be additional funding through that ESA that then can be used both for tuition and for outside therapies. So there's a lot of option. There's a lot of wiggle room. And I mean, this is the epitome of parental choice here with ESAs. So why does that matter to you? Get the details of what your state offers, and if there are additional monies available for students with documented diagnosed disabilities available to you that you could be using both for tuition and for outside services. Tax credit scholarships. These are probably the most complicated of the three. I'm going to do my best, though. I used to work for a tax credit organization in Arizona, and when I worked there, it had been established for like 24 years, but it was still really hard to educate people about the prongs of a tax credit program, because there are just a few different moving parts. So I'm going to try to put this in a nutshell for you. All right, so there's a three-pronged system with tax credit scholarships. The donors are integral, the organizations themselves, and then the scholarship recipients, so the students and the families that are applying for those scholarships. The money is contributed to a scholarship granting organization by individuals or corporations. So as an individual taxpayer or as a company, you can designate funds to an SGO, and then they take those funds and they distribute them in the form of scholarships to families that apply. The benefit of that for donors is that you can receive, here in Arizona, it's a dollar for dollar tax credit. Some states have between 50% and 100%. So it might be a, 50 cents on the dollar tax credit for the donor, or, but it could be up to 100% like it is here in my state, toward your tax liability. That's probably the hardest part for people to understand. What's the benefit of being a donor to this program? It's a dollar for dollar tax credit. So tax credit scholarships typically in most states can be used for tuition. Some tax credit scholarships are larger for children with special needs. So again, depending by state, California isn't on that list. Sorry about that. Nope. 33 states, only 33 states. So get out there and start advocating. Some tax credit scholarships are larger for children with those special needs. So like here again, Florida and Arizona are probably, because they're the longest running programs, they have very specific programs for kids with special needs, scholarships that can be applied for. Here in Arizona, it's called the Disabled Displaced Scholarship that families can apply for if they're is a documented diagnosed disability. What that means, again, I've got to go back to what Diane and Maggie were talking about, going through the public school system. If you get that private eval, that's great, get that private eval, but then you still have to get that private evaluation recognized by the LEA, by the public district of the private school where your child attends, in order for your child to be counted for these programs, for equitable share funds, for proportionate share through IDEA, or through any of these tax credit or ESA programs. So that documentation is really important. I know that there are many families in private schools that they just don't want to go through the public district to get their child evaluated. You can go ahead and go through and get that private eval. I went that route myself for my child with a disability. We went the private route, but then we also had it stamped by the LEA so that he would benefit, get additional services, and get additional funding. So that's why it matters. That's why it matters to families to get that public school stamp of approval. Okay, and then one last, we're going to talk about federal tax credit really quick here. There's not a ton of information yet out there on federal tax credit scholarships. States do have to opt in for the federal tax credit scholarship. The great thing about the federal tax credit scholarship is that if your state is already one that has other programs running, this can be stacked on top of that. I think the governor has to approve that. So again, there's a lot of politics involved here with this federal tax credit, but there's so much to learn about it. Those scholarships wouldn't begin being distributed until 2027. So there's going to be about a year of educating donors on what that means, what that tax credit part means, like what is the benefit to a donor, how much can an individual donor give to a tax credit organization, and then for families to understand that they can apply for those scholarships and get those distributed, and that won't start until 2027. So we've got about a year of advocacy and ramp up. So get out there and advocate and become educated so that you can help educate others about these programs. They can be a game changer. For states that have no programs right now, like I said, there are only 33 that have programs. So for those states that don't have any, this could be the game changer for you. So learn about it and get out there and talk about it. So it's an additional potential funding source, and that's why it matters. Okay, I'm going to shift gears really quick here and just talk about the potential for nonprofit organizations that support Catholic schools throughout the country. When schools want to be equipped to serve children with special needs, there's a cost and a commitment to resources to be able to do that well. And that can be through personnel, equipment, or training. There are many independent nonprofits that have been started usually by parents advocating for their children to be able to attend Catholic schools throughout the country. I'll give you a list of these in just a minute, and so you can see if there's one in your state. Sometimes these nonprofits work in partnership with their diocese, and sometimes they are just independent from their diocese and work in collaboration directly with the schools. They look different in every diocese. But what these nonprofits do is they fundraise, and then they are able to be able to pay for training for school faculty, for teachers and interventionists and leaders. They can pay for personnel, and they can pay for necessary equipment that may be needed to be able to serve students that have exceptional needs. So why does this matter to parents of kids with special needs? Because if your diocese doesn't have one of these organizations, you might be motivated to get a small group of parents together who want to advocate for this. And there are many of us out here who would help you get started with your own nonprofit. Maggie, if you want to flip to the next page, I can show you where some of these organizations already exist. Now, keep in mind, there are 194 Catholic dioceses and archdioceses across the country. So when you look at this list, you're like, wow, that's great. Look at how many states they exist in. But this is not enough because every diocese needs one of these, at least one of these organizations, right? So As you look through, maybe you can find your state on there. There are a number of independent organizations that they do different things to serve their schools, and then there are a number of there are a number of fire affiliate organizations that are popping up, and those are popping up all the time. And so, yeah. Like I said, if you're interested, if you're motivated by that, reaching out to any one of these organizations would be helpful to you. We're always willing to help people who want to get a nonprofit started. And the next two slides are going to provide you with some. Oh, there's one. I'm going to add that to the list. There's one in Evansville. Yay. Okay, so here's a list of resources. These are specifically from nonprofits. So if you want to see what some of these nonprofits do, this is just a handful of websites from those foundations, but you can look at any of those foundations that are on that list. But these are some that you could reach out to, and I know that they would help you get started and answer questions for you. The next slide is sources about school choice programs. So if you have more questions about school choice, look at your own State Department of Education website, but you can also look at these other websites for more information.
And finally, in addition to all of those organizations that that Colleen was talking about, you can also take a look close by and take a look at some of the organizations that exist within your own parish. And one of the ones that you can look at and inquire with is your local Knights of Columbus Council. There are lots of councils that have got scholarships of one kind or another. So you can go to them. Here are state councils that have them, but then also local councils have them. So you can go to your local Knights of Columbus and say, what types of, what does it take to get a scholarship? What are your requirements? What kind of scholarships do you offer? And the other thing, particularly with the Knights of Columbus, is to remember, every year, if you've got Knights of Columbus in your parish, you'll see them outside doing what has traditionally been called the Tootsie Roll program. And it's their Knights of Columbus campaign for people with intellectual disabilities. And, go to grants are offered to public and private agencies, but go to your Knights of Columbus Council and say, how are you using those funds? I know at the council at my parish, at various times they've given the money directly to the school, that our parish school, specifically to support their students with special needs. They've also given it to some of the other nonprofits that support schools that support students with special needs. So you can always go to places like that and say, hey, how can you help me with my child for whom I want a Catholic education but has special learning needs?
All right, well, we will get started with some questions, and I'm going to start with the most direct question, which is, I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, but Colleen, can you confirm all of the dioceses that were on that list of fire foundations and affiliates, they all are called FIRE, correct?
Only the ones that were on the fire side.
Right, on the fire side, on the fire
Yeah.
side. So the name of the one in Sacramento is FIRE.
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
Mhm.
So, Angelica, your answer is yes. And then I want to, let's see here, ask the one about, so you were talking about IDEA at the time, and I think that you will all have some answers or examples of this because it can look so differently. Because I'm fairly certain the question says, are you speaking about dual enrollment here? And it was when we were talking about receiving services under IDEA from the public school, so speech, PT, OT, maybe something else, while enrolled in a Catholic school. So is that the same thing as dual enrollment? And then maybe if just each of you can give an example of how you've seen that set up and look, because I think we've got different examples.
I'll go ahead and start. We don't use the term dual enrollment in Virginia, but typically the students are enrolled in the Catholic school, and then either the public school sends a representative or a service provider to the Catholic school for services for the children who need it. And typically in our area, it turns out to be speech language services only. So they'll send a speech therapy to our buildings, or if they don't do that, then the student in the Catholic school has to go to the public school system to receive their services. So they're spending, we try to arrange it so it's either first thing in the morning or at the end of the day, so that there's not a lot of lost instructional time during that transition. So it probably is dual enrollment in some places because they have to be enrolled. I don't know if they have to be enrolled in public school. They're not there. They have to be registered with the public school.
Yeah, in the Maryland area, it's not, we don't call it dual enrollment either. It's the same, it works the same way as Diane was describing. The kids are enrolled in the private school, but they are receiving their ID. They may be receiving, depending upon what services the particular LEA has approved for parentally placed students. They will receive those services either in the Catholic school, or very often the student has to go to the local school in order to get their services. And more often they try to negotiate so that the student doesn't have to go to their home school to get those services. They can go to the school that is geographically closest to their public school. But that's a point of negotiation that has to happen at the time that the services are accepted. Then it's like, okay, how can we make this so that the services are convenient for the child and the family if the service provider is not going to come to the Catholic school?
I've seen it work most smoothly in, I work in about 14 different states, and the one where I see it working most smoothly is in Seattle. For whatever reason, they do call it dual enrollment, and the kids are dually enrolled with the Catholic and the public school, and the services are provided, and they work really seamlessly together. I rarely see that type of collaboration and that type of willingness to work so hand in hand to serve the kids, but it works really beautifully there. So it can work.
All right. And we had kind of some frustration at the beginning. That's also a little bit of a question, a philosophical question, that, there are so many Catholic schools who, even if maybe they served learners with disabilities in the past, budgets get tight, and then they discontinue whatever supports they had, and they send the kids to the public schools. And so kind of just that why. And again, I think there's probably an easy but disheartening answer to that. But why don't we serve more learners with disabilities in our Catholic schools? So, and Patty, why don't you take that one?
I was just gonna say, right, like, I think the one thing that I do see happening in our diocese is, my position was created, right, because we want to serve more students with disabilities. So I think it just depends within the diocese and what they want to do, and your bishops too, supporting your Catholic schools. But it's like one of those things that, we're working together to hopefully, like, seeing the importance of having everyone, right? Because that's how we are created, and that's what Jesus says, like, everyone should be welcoming. So in our diocese, my position was created for that, so I can help our schools. It is a long process, and I do feel like, maybe the frustration as other people, but it's something that we're continuing, trying to, like, find different funds to, and get educated together, educating our community, our parishes, our pastors, so we can, widely open our doors to students, and not just make them that they are welcome, but that they belong in our schools.
And I think that that actually leads very, very beautifully into another question that was asked, which was, you know, my child is in Catholic school now and receiving services that are paid for by insurance, which we all know insurance can change their mind about things very quickly and sometimes suddenly. I'm going to answer the appeal thing. You can appeal anything, right, Maggie? Like
Yes.
if insurance denies anything, you can appeal
You
anything.
can feel it.
And you know, include lots of documentation and everything. But then her second part of the question was, how can I express the importance of inclusion? And making sure that we've got resources to have learners with disabilities in Catholic schools within a specific diocese. So the creation of Patty's position was a really nice reaction to starting to demonstrate that. But how do whoever people who care about this, what do they do to try to make the diocese aware of how important this is?
I think parents just need to bring the need, obviously to their parish, to the parish school, to the pastor there, but they might also need to knock on the door at the archdiocesan or diocesan level, rigorously, emphatically, and consistently, because I think that we can all agree that the need is there. And I think one of the other pieces that it's difficult to sometimes get everybody to understand is that when our schools are including and educating children with special needs, they become better educators of all of their students. And so, that's pretty well, it's not just somebody's opinion. There's a lot of documentation about that. So I think parents do need to be, like in the gospel, the woman knocking at the door and knocking and knocking and knocking. And then maybe those positions will be created like Patty's position.
I'll
And
also,
sorry, not just knock at the door, but if you have to drop through the roof, drop through the roof.
Yeah,
Read the Gospel of
that
John,
too.
like whatever you
That's
have to
true.
do.
use the bishop's pastoral statement on people with disabilities, which says there cannot be a separate church for people with disabilities. My interpretation as a school person is there can't be a separate school for people with disabilities either. So let's bring them together and figure out how we can best serve the students that God is sending our direction.
And maybe connecting, to organizations or other schools or other dioceses that do have that are doing it, that are have sort of a unified approach to this, so that your diocese, your school, your pastor can see that yes, this can happen and it's a beautiful thing.
It is being done well in other places. And sometimes that's what it takes is, the field trip or the phone call or well, what does this look like somewhere else? And you kind of have to get out of your own backyard to see that. I would encourage that because there's a lot going on across the country that simply people just aren't aware of. So kind of getting out and figuring out where those things are happening, and go see it. I would say this too, in the Diocese of Phoenix, I know there's a couple of people on here from Phoenix who could support this as well. Our organization, the Matthew 1914 Project, has existed for 11 years, and it's just this year that a committee was started to support disability in church life. It takes a long time, so keep knocking, keeping persistent. If you do need to start an organization on the side to get the work done and support the families, do that, but don't wait for the diocese in order to do that. That's why a lot of those nonprofits exist independent of dioceses. Eventually, sometimes they come together or sometimes they start together, but don't wait because there's urgency. The importance of kids in schools, especially in those early years, we can't wait. They need to get what they need, and they need to get it sooner than later. So be urgent about it. And if that means that you set up your own organization, like I said, reach out, and there are lots of people that can help you do that.
I heard you all talk about, some things to be prepared for if you go and you start talking to the diocese or archdiocese. And, one of them lists of other places that are doing this really well. And I think some research on those financial options in your state would be among that too, because the number one cited reason is going to be financial. And so, they can't knock you down so quickly if you've got information on, well, but here are ways we can help fund it, or, tap into federal money. Is there anyone in here that can help us connect with those that know how to start a nonprofit if we can't find one near us? I think Colleen just needs to put her email address in the
Right. I know.
chat,
Yeah,
right?
you can call me too. Yeah.
I was going to say
I will.
that the list that Colleen included, you could click on any one of those and contact, and those people will become your best friends.
Yep. They will help you. They will give you your time. Mhm.
Let's see, do we have any additional questions? We had one that I was trying to get some additional information on, and then that person had to hop off, but I think that she was the same thing, looking for resources related to starting one of those nonprofits. As anybody thinks of any other last minute, either details to share or questions, I am going to upload the list of resources that they were referring to that you can download directly from here. And Angelica posted a very, very nice comment, sweet comment, hard work, but holy work.
Mhm. It's not easy, that's for sure.
And certainly praying for fast, good outcomes for your child, and insurance continuing to pay for things. Yeah. All right. If there are no other questions, thank you so much for having joined us today. Make sure to grab your resources in that PDF, and have a fabulous rest of your day.